On Tuesday, February 11, 2025, a user named Fragola Galactica posted a thread titled, "What is the most terrifying supernatural experience you've ever had?" I remember when I was a child, I once saw two large, yellow eyes in the mirror facing my bed at night. I was 10 years old, maybe even younger. I remember calling out for my parents afterward. Once they came in to check on me, those eyes never returned. But I do remember asking my dad to move that mirror out of my room a few days later. Another time, when I was around 16, I saw my late grandfather watching me sleep. My dog was barking at him. He didn't seem frightened by it at all. He was very tall, wearing a blue plaid shirt, and had white hair and a white beard, but he had no face. I didn't actually know much about him because he passed away when I was only a year old. When it happened, I was terrified. I didn't realize who it was until after he left. My mother later showed me one of his old shirts, a black and blue plaid pattern, and that's when it clicked. That was my grandfather. Yet another time, when I was 12, I heard my mother calling my name just as I got home. However, she was supposed to be at my uncle's house. I waited a few minutes before answering the call, but when I went to look for her, she clearly wasn't home. It wasn't until about 2 hours later that she actually returned. A user named Personal Problem shared a similar story from their childhood involving yellow eyes, much like the Cheshire Cat. When his family first moved into a new house, he saw them through the window, but when his mother woke up to check, there was nothing there, even though all the curtains in the house had been drawn shut. Upon first reading this, I immediately thought he might have imagined those yellow eyes, just like Fragola Galactica. The way he described them sounded exactly like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. It's possible both were subconsciously obsessed with those eyes from the movie, and being children at the time made their imaginations even more vivid. However, after reading further into the comments, both Personal Problem and Fragola Galactica claimed they were too young at the time to even know what Alice in Wonderland was. From my own personal experience, childhood memories often contain supernatural stories like these. I'm sure those of you watching this video have also had moments where you questioned whether you really saw something standing in the corner of the room, or felt a shiver down your spine remembering long-forgotten childhood memories. Below the post, other users also shared their own chilling accounts, CP9200. About 30 years ago, while I was in college, I went camping for a few days in an open field just outside of town with 3 friends. On our final night, as the sun was setting but before it was completely dark, we all spotted a pitch-black shape appearing about 10 meters away. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then everyone else saw it too. It seemed to become clearer and its color grew more intense. This sounds bizarre, but it looked like a void of darkness filled with silver glimmers and a distinct outline. Imagine silver wires laid over a floating black blanket. That's the best comparison I can make from memory. It was about 1.5 meters tall and 3 to 4.5 meters wide, looking like a fat sausage standing upright, though its shape wasn't perfectly sharp. After a moment, once we all realized it was there and turned to look at it, the thing suddenly dashed to the other side of the camp with a fast, fluid motion. It approached the person closest to it, about 4 or 5 meters away, startling him. As it got near a nearby bush, it seemed to evaporate and vanish. We felt incredibly stressed by what we had just witnessed, but couldn't rationalize it. It left us with a sense of extreme unease. We eventually tried to convince ourselves that we had imagined it, but it felt like we were going crazy. Even after all these years, it's still strange to think about that eerie feeling of seeing something we weren't supposed to see. Maybe it was a mass hallucination or a swarm of fireflies. I don't know, but that thing was truly freakish and scared us half to death. To this day, we still don't know what we saw, but 4 sober 17-year-olds definitely saw the same thing. Another user replied to CP9200. I saw something very similar to what you described. It was a shimmering entity, almost identical in detail. Not once did I see it for longer than a minute. This happened in 2015 when I was living in a temporary house. Its size matched yours as well. Although I and 2 others saw it, we never got a clear look at its form. All 3 of us would catch it out of the corner of our eyes. At first, it was very fast and moved erratically. We usually ignored it and made up mundane excuses to calm ourselves down. We did that until it slowed down just enough that we could no longer deny its existence. We didn't talk about what was happening in that house. We would pretend not to see or hear anything and only discuss it once we were out, like when we went out to eat. I think that's why it slowed down. It wanted us to know it existed. I believe the more we think and talk about it, the more energy it gains, giving it a specific identity and more power. I'm just glad it didn't follow us. The stole one. I lived in a haunted house back in the 70s. We didn't have much money, so I only had a thin mattress on my bed instead of a proper sleeping pad. I remember lying in the dark and feeling like someone was under the bed, pressing up against the mattress. Sometimes it felt like a finger, sometimes a foot, or even a fist. It scared the life out of me. Bach Bash Boss 21121 replied, "When I was about 6, my brother and I slept in a bunk bed. I was on the bottom and he was on top. One night while I was still awake, my mattress was suddenly pushed from below, shoving my legs and body all the way to the right. I yelled at my brother, thinking he was playing a prank, but he insisted he wasn't doing anything. He was telling the truth, because if he had jumped down, I would have hurt him, and there was no way he could have climbed back up that fast. Not to mention, the space under my bed was far too cramped and cluttered for him to crawl into." M. Hams 69. "Oh man, I experienced this a lot in my house. We have thicker mattresses now, so I don't feel the movements from underneath anymore, but occasionally I still feel the bed sink on one side, as if someone is sitting on the edge." Jim: "I was cleaning my garage one night when the motion sensor light just outside the door snapped on. It had been doing that all night, but this one specific time felt different. Suddenly, I froze in sheer terror. I said in a low, trembling voice, 'If someone is here, you should leave.' Right after I spoke, a bag of toys began to fall over, scaring the living daylights out of me. It lasted for a few seconds and then stopped, and that feeling of dread vanished completely as if nothing had happened. I even continued cleaning for over an hour after that. But another terrible night, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw something formed from swirling black clouds standing by my bed. It had a torso, a head, and shoulders. I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark, but then the thing suddenly leaned toward me, as if it were inspecting me closely. The air around it was freezing. I couldn't sleep at all after that. Someone on Reddit actually recreated their experience using 3D tools and posted it a few months ago, and it truly gave me the chills." Brittany shared a terrifying experience from her time working as a security guard at a large entertainment complex. "I worked as a guard at a massive complex with rental apartments, restaurants, shops, and more. Part of the job involved checking the fire and water systems, including the eye wash stations. The task was simple: turn on the water for 5 minutes, check the temperature, and sign the logbook. I worked the night shift and usually checked the kitchen area around 3 a.m. because it was always empty then. There was one specific kitchen I hated visiting because I always felt like I was being watched. It was much worse at night when all the lights were turned off. While patrolling that building, I constantly felt like someone was standing in the doorway watching my every move. To add some context, earlier that night, my coworker had shown off his newly bought shoes and said he couldn't wait to walk around in them during his rounds. When I got to the kitchen, I turned on my phone's flashlight to check the eye wash station. I turned the water on, waited a few minutes, turned it off, and started filling out the log. While I was writing down the date, I heard footsteps approaching and saw a pair of legs and shoes stop right in front of me, just at the edge of my vision. They looked exactly like my friend's new shoes. So instead of looking up, I smiled and said, "Well, you finally got to try out those new shoes, huh? How did you finish your round so fast?" When there was no response, I quickly looked up. No one was there. My heart sank instantly. Moments later, I heard my friend's voice over the radio saying he had just finished patrolling one building and was heading to the next. I searched the entire kitchen and found no one. That story is from 5 years ago, and I still remember it vividly. I tried to convince myself I was just tired, but I've heard other coworkers tell strange stories about that mysterious building too. There is a common thread among these stories, told by random, unrelated people of different ages and professions. The shadows they see have no faces. Smithy shared, "We have to be wary of things without faces. My ex-girlfriend could see spirits. She saw them everywhere and said they have the ability to shift their faces into someone else's. This is extremely common among spirits. Fragola Galactica joined the conversation again. I was so sure it was my grandfather, but many people here are saying it might have been a demon. Man, I'm starting to get scared. This happened years ago. I thought maybe because I never met him or knew much about him, I couldn't see his face. Or maybe my eyes didn't have enough time to adjust after waking up. But I think a guardian angel or a protective spirit would want to communicate through a familiar face. Things with bad energy probably can't do that. Regardless, what happened, happened. At least I could see his mustache and beard. He might be a demon with a mustache. He must really care about his appearance. That's a good sign then. Maybe it really was your grandfather. Your dog could probably sense whether it was a good or bad entity. However, woven among those chilling tales are stories where people encountered the deceased looking exactly as they did in life. So real they couldn't tell the difference. Party 18712. I've had many supernatural experiences while on duty as a police officer. One time, I had to go to a house to deliver a death notification, and it truly shook me. I was there to speak with the family of a woman who had passed away in a car accident just a few miles from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the gate, just inside the yard. She said she could hear me coming from a mile away. I asked if she lived there, and she confirmed she did. When I asked if we could continue our conversation inside, she agreed but told me to go ahead, because she would be walking slowly behind me. The distance from the yard to the front door was about 70 meters. After reaching the porch and turning back to look for her, it was about 1 a.m. While I was still scanning the yard for the woman, the front door opened and a young woman appeared. She looked worried by my presence and asked what was wrong. I asked if I could speak with her and her family. She agreed and invited me in. I told her I would wait for the woman I had just met outside, so we could all go in together, but she told me there was no one else home at the time. I panicked and stepped outside to check the surroundings. There was no one. After stepping back inside, I broke the news to her and her husband about Susan, the young woman's mother. She told me her mother had moved in with them a few months prior, after her father passed away, and she hadn't been doing well since. While they were comforting each other, I began looking at the photos hanging on the wall. One picture of a middle-aged woman stood out to me. She looked like a younger version of the woman I had spoken to in the yard. When I looked at more photos, the daughter confirmed that was indeed her mother, the woman who had just died in the accident. I had spoken to the ghost of the deceased right before notifying her family of her passing. Dark Kitten 88 is another person who has seen spirits as solid as flesh and blood. I once saw a man walking right next to me as we entered an old factory. He went in first and I was right behind him. Suddenly, he vanished. There was no other way out except the entrance we both used. It scared the life out of me. There are some haunted places I've entered where it feels like walking through spiderwebs. I'm convinced that's the sensation of spirits touching you, because I'm certain there were no actual cobwebs there. Finally, Fragola Galactica shared one more supernatural family story, this time involving their father. My father was still living at my grandmother's house about a year after she passed away. He saw my grandmother appearing as if she were still alive, in the flesh, standing in the doorway. He called out to her, she turned around and they talked for a while. She asked many things, and my father answered. She asked how we were doing and if everything was okay, appearing very relaxed and happy. She then walked into the kitchen, her favorite area of the house. My father followed her, and as soon as she turned the corner, she vanished. My father was a non-believer at the time, and certainly not someone who easily believed in these things. I was the one who found him shortly after, face pale and in total shock. He is probably the one who has seen the most supernatural things in our family. When he was a child, he heard voices and saw many mysterious things. The voices stopped for a few years, but returned right after he had a skiing accident where he broke both legs, which happened when I was 1 year old, the same year my grandfather died. Personally, I'm not a very superstitious person, more the better safe than sorry type, and I've always leaned toward logical thinking. For most issues, I look for scientific explanations. The supernatural was never my first thought. However, the existence of demons and spirits is perhaps beyond dispute, when even I have had to doubt myself in the face of events that science simply cannot explain. Have you ever encountered any supernatural or mysterious cases that you still can't explain to this day? Please share them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. Goodbye and see you again.